Huayrup, Jetchqua, Willie Sellers, Cook Beat the Gekko. Hello everyone, Chief Willie Sellers with the Williams Lake First Nation, and I wanted to welcome you to the first ever National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Today is a day that we hold up those survivors, those quom, those victors. We hold up our elders. We hold up those individuals that continue to persevere, that continue to pass on our culture, pass on our language, pass on our ceremonies. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to, fill that void and find the balance in every single one of our communities. Today is a day for them, and today is a day to acknowledge the legacies of residential schools in this country and how we continue to strive, how we continue to, hold up every single one of our communities. My name is Chief Willie Sellers, and it's an honor for me to be able to open up the day in a good way.
This year marks the first year of a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and National Federal Statutory Holiday on September 30th. A day for thoughts and discussions on remembering, recovering, and reconciling. Orange Shirt Day is a day to have conversation about all aspects of residential school. It is a day to honor residential school survivors and their families and to remember those that didn't make it. And a day to highlight progress in the reconciliation of Indigenous people and Canadian society. These actions are necessary to bring about healing for the future relationship in Canada. We chose September 30th because September is the time of year the children were taken away from their homes and their families. We chose the 30th because we wanted teachers and students time to settle in, time for teachers to teach students about the history, and time for us to plan an event. When I heard an elder say that September was Crying Month, I knew that we had selected the right date.
So first of all, I want to thank Phyllis Webstat for the amazing work she has done to bring this issue to light, literally around the world. The horrific finds of the 215 unmarked graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School came as no surprise to many in the Indigenous communities who knew firsthand about these children's deaths. However, since the early 1990s, hundreds of unmarked grave sites, mainly believed to be Indigenous children, were located near the former sites of 6 Canadian Indian residential schools across Canada. Now, why did those news stories not get more traction? There will be many more discoveries now that the technology is there. Every former residential school in Canada must be investigated. And we cannot forget the many students like Chani Wenjack who ran away from the school only to freeze to death. We acknowledge the late Gordon Downey for his song about Chani and for taking the time as a Canadian to really understand this part of Canadian history. There are possibly thousands of Chani Wenjacks who did not make it home from the 130 to 140 residential schools that operated across Canada for over 100 years. We also need to acknowledge the suicides and the fallout of many destroyed lives as a result of these institutions. I was shocked that the House of Commons and other government buildings lowered their flag to half-mast after the Kamloops discovery. That, of course, should have been a given, but for many Indigenous peoples, we are so used to our voices being ignored or silenced. We thank Canadians and the world for the outpouring of support and remembrance of our children. That is a step in the right direction of acknowledging the whole truth about Canadian history. But we need to quit calling it a chapter in Canadian history. A chapter can easily be glossed over or skipped altogether. Our people were here before everyone else, and their experiences with the new peoples needs to be front and center in every chapter of Canadian history. Otherwise, what they are writing and teaching is still inaccurate. But that's a topic for another day. So the theme of today is a time of healing, a time to share knowledge. I want to remind everyone that Indigenous people have been sharing our knowledge since contact. We shared how to live and survive on this land. And once the tables turned, we shared our concerns and the wrongs inflicted on us. As early as 1907, investigations into these institutions have been documented. One report by Peter Bryce to government is called "The Story of a National Crime." The governments buried it until Indigenous peoples brought it back in the early 1990s. Indigenous parents continuously raised concerns about the treatment of their children at these institutions. The list of commissions, investigations, committees to study the so-called Indian problems is long. The issues have been identified and solutions put forward by Indigenous peoples. But the only ones who seem to get any benefits out of all this work are the ones who are being paid to do the reports. At the very least, everyone in Canada should read the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. Surprisingly, but not surprisingly for Indigenous people, the fourth volume is titled "Canada's Residential Schools, Missing Children and Unmarked Burials." You can also read books by Indigenous authors, and there are many to choose from.
What can be done about sharing knowledge about the individuals and the impacts about those that were attending those residential schools? It starts with finding those allies. You know, we hold up these individuals, these survivors in every single one of our communities as a community. You know, we honor them and we hold them up and we make sure that they're doing okay. But, you know, as we continue to educate all the people around us, you know, we educate those non-First Nation politicians, those, you know, municipal, those federal, those provincial. We need them to step up and help us in our healing journeys too. I mean, it's not just First Nation kids that are dealing with this in those school systems. And as we continue to educate those non-First Nation kids about the history and legacy of what happened in those schools and those, you know, what happened to those survivors and how they've persevered, it's going to help empower those First Nation students, because people are going to have a better understanding of that history, be able to help us hold those individuals up. And that's going to be very, very key moving forward in how we heal, not only as a community, as a nation, but as a country.
I hear all this talk about this residential schools, and people want to know if I'm okay with what they classify as non-Aboriginal people, if they should know about it. I think everybody should know about it. Everybody knows about it anyway. It's on the news. But our personal stories are a different thing. If they don't have respect for me and what I went through, then no, they shouldn't know. But if they respect the pain that I went through, the suffering that I went through, the shame and humiliation that I went through, if they understood it and respected, then yes, I don't care if they know or not. Education isn't a bad thing. Even though a lot of us that went through that Indian school, we could contest that. Education of the Shamat world or Christian world compared to what we knew when we grew up, how much was lost over the years. It's only been 20 years since I started speaking the language a bit. For a long time I only talked the language in the sweat house. Only sang in the sweat house. I didn't sing outside of that place. It's the only time that I felt sacred. Now I take my drum out and can sing whenever I feel like it.
I've learned to listen to my dad a little bit more. I've learned to hear the words that he has to say a little bit more. You want to know, you got to ask. But you got to be prepared for the raw details that you're going to get. The real details that you're going to get. You're not going to get the sugar-coated version that you think you're going to hear. We didn't learn about residential schools and the effects and the harshness of those schools. But I have a more of an understanding now, more than ever, to be gentle, to be considerate. And I'm fortunate to have such great teachers in my life, so then that I can bring it to my children and teach them. To be honest, to be open, to be loving, to be caring, and that it is okay to cry, that it is okay to get mad, but in a healthy way, in a healthy setting, because there's a time and a place for everything.
Every holiday we went home was harder to leave home. Seemed like that was the only time you realized your life was changing. From being little to having to face other people. Watching what's around you and people being hurt, people being molested. And I didn't know why this was happening. Kids being beat up by these nuns, kicked around by these nuns. I asked my mother why, I was about 10 years old, why they weren't doing anything about it. And it was just like she said, there's just things you don't mention. You don't talk about all this. But the harshest is watching little ones being molested. No matter what you say, what you do, is nothing you can do about it. Just try and tell somebody and you get slapped for it or get whipped for it. I remembered being beat with a folded up 10-foot skipping rope, beating my back and legs until I hit the floor, and still had to stand and go down to dinner and act like if nothing happened. So things like that I remember, and I think about the girls that went through all this abuse, thinking, thank God Orange Shirt Day came along so lot of us that are holding back are relieved now that somebody believes us, that these things happen. I'm glad that I finally opened up to my family, because they often wondered why I was so mean at times, so angry at times, and not knowing. But I am still working on myself, and it's going to take a while yet. Thank you.
It's been hard to understand within my own brain how we can get past this, but I know that we can. It's just going to take one day at a time, conversation at a time. I knew my mom went to mission. Growing up, I didn't really fully understand what the mission was, what it was about. But recently, with everything that has come to light, I started realizing what happened and what was going on there. I have memories of going out there with my mom, my dad Willie, my stepdad. I have memories of being out there, seeing where they ate, where they slept. When I started realizing what had gone on, I started having a lot of mixed feelings. I became really unsure of who I was. I know my mom as the rock in our family. She's always been there, no matter what. She's always made sure we had everything. She always provided for us, made sure we were happy, made sure we were safe. So a lot of my strength comes from my mom. And hearing some of the stories of what happened out there and what had gone on with other family members and stuff, knowing how close we came to being there, to having to go to school there. I understand my mom a lot better now. I understand the pain that she went through. I understand my uncle a lot better now. And what they witnessed. I find days where I pray. And a lot of my praying is to ease their mind, to bring them happiness, because they deserve it. My uncle deserves to be happy. My mom deserves to be happy. They don't deserve to have those memories. So now I know as a family, we try and create as many happy memories as we can. We try to come together. I really love my mom.
Residential schools, they were not where you wanted to send your children. In the early 1900s, the RCMP were told to remove the children from the communities, from the First Nations communities. The First Nations themselves weren't allowed to leave the communities without an Indian agent's letter So when the RCMP came out and removed the children, they also apprehended parents and grandparents that tried to keep their children in the homes. In 1981, when the residential school closed, they brought me home. It wasn't a home that I recognized. It wasn't a home that I grew up in. I never knew anybody in my community. I was basically a lost child. As time went on, I ended up with my parents, both residential school survivors. My dad was a mean drunk, beat me all the time. It's the only way that he could show emotion. So I moved out at the age of 14. My mom, who had always been the staple of my life, was the one that raised me till I was 10, 11. But she only had me for 2 months of the year, sometimes 1 month of the year. And I never really had parents growing up. I don't know what a mom and dad are supposed to do or supposed to look like, but I'm very grateful for my wife. She's been the mother and the father of my 2 beautiful daughters, and can't say enough about everything that she's done to keep the family atmosphere alive.
And over the years, I've learned a lot of things. I started going back into things I learned from my dad. I went into this program, trauma program, in 2002. And in that program, they had a session they called psychodrama. And they had me relive a part of my life that I couldn't talk about. And when I talked about it, it was about my friend Happy and my dad, when my dad took his life. And at that time I realized and I found out that I wasn't angry at my dad. I was angry at the loss of my friend. In my confusion, I blamed my dad for everything that happened to me. But I didn't realize that I was angry at my friend for leaving me behind to deal with all this shit on my own. I remember after I went through that session of psychodrama, that night I had a dream. And me and Happy were riding in this big meadow, just running bareback, with no bridle or anything under his horses. We were running. And then he just turned back at me and he waved at me like that and he kept on going. And I never seen him again. And he was happy. He was smiling. Eh? How many years it took me to release my friend? He was stuck here in this place because I wouldn't let him go. And I can remember the freedom that I felt when I let him go. Because it gave me that freedom to go and do what I do today. Gather medicine, what my dad taught me. Talk about things that my dad talked about. Talk about my truth. I always tell my children, my life is an open book today. If there's anything you need to know about my life, just ask. I said, but be careful what you ask. You might not like what you're going to hear. It's like today, I had no clue what I was going to talk about when I sat down here. The medicine helped me make up my mind what I wanted to share. But I want to thank you for asking me to talk about this. At least now you know a small part of my life. Like I said, if there's anything you need to know, just ask. But be careful what you ask. You might not like what you're going to hear. Because I'm pretty explicit when it comes to the truth.
Breaking through. Getting to know my dad wasn't all that easy. It was like hitting a brick wall, made my stomach queasy. Yeah, he worked hard to put a roof over our heads and food on the table, but drawing his attention became nothing but a fable. It's hard to explain, difficult to tell. You see, he grew up a victim of residential day school hell. He refused to talk about it. He passed off my questions with a joke. Yet in his eyes I could see there were many hidden secrets he wanted to let be. You see, he lost his language. He said he spoke Michif, my son, forced to give it up for English or suffer another lash from a nun. To be clear, he rarely spoke, yet his silence was loud. He never told me he loved me or said he was proud. He seldom showed emotion. He never offered a hug. It made me feel sad, gave my heart a tug. Even as he lay dying in his hospital bed, I thought he'd finally speak or at least turn the other cheek. However, it wasn't meant to be because, you see, there was no one by his side. He passed away alone. I heard it through Facebook and later a call on the phone. And while questions remain unanswered, it finally dawned. Now that I understand, all the pain is gone.
So me and my brothers and sisters, we are survivors of, children of survivors of residential school. My mom attended, her brother and her sisters also attended. I have a aunt who passed away when she was very young, murdered and missing, found. So that piece touches our whole family. And my dad, he had the good fortune, the blessing of not having to attend, but he still felt the impact. He was the only child left in the valley when all of the other kids went to residential school. And for him, like all of the other children, it was the loneliest time of the year. And he really felt the impact of residential school, even though he was not one of the kids who attended. His mother knew and understood what was going to happen, and she didn't want that for him. So she took him out on the land, and they survived with her knowledge of the land and all of those things that are there to keep him from the Indian agent and the RCMP that were following them to try and take my dad to residential school. So because of my grandma, he was spared that experience of going to residential school. So some of the impacts that I've noticed and felt growing up in my community and in this area is that we really felt a sense of fear. We were told to, when we were being emotional, as all young children do at some point in their day, we were told to be quiet, to not cry, otherwise the RCMP would take us. Or don't cry, the white people are watching. So I didn't really fully understand those things until I grew up and started to learn about residential school. But also living as a young person in Williams Lake, being discounted by teachers, by other people. I really loved playing sports, hockey, and so there was quite a bit of racial tension that was added from some of the other players and some of the teams, and certainly some of our own coaching staff that were in charge of our teams. So being in a place of not knowing and not fully understanding why the color of my skin was something that wasn't good. I grew up not wanting to be Shuswap or not wanting to be an Indian. I wanted to be something else. I think that this is a very important time in the history of Canada and the history of our people and all First Nations people throughout Canada and all around the world. It's a really good opportunity to fully understand what the people have gone through, not only the First Nations, but also all of the people who live in the communities and in the country that are involved. So I'm going to sing the Chief song. It's a leader song. So for the leader and all of us, this is that song to remind us of who we are and who we're born to be, and that we go out and share that as a leader, as the only person who can share that message. Way-oh, 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 oh, kuksako, kalkopi, sa chanalya gurin itselin.
I look at what it is and what it means to be First Nations. There's a pride there, and we can feel that pride. You can feel the pride when we sing, you can feel the pride as we go through this together with the language awakening, the songs that are coming back, the ceremonies, the potlatches, everything that we're doing is trying to bring that pride back to who you and who we are as First Nations people. Governments come and go. Settlers come and go. But the First Nations have always been here. We're not going to leave. We're going to be here. My grandparents are going to be here. My great-grandparents have been here. You know, generation after generation. We need to change that. We need to give an opportunity to the First Nations people to heal. And the only way that's going to happen is through education. We have to educate the general public. We have to educate, and Canada has to play its role in that education. They have to start to utilize the language. They have to provide funding so that First Nations can speak their truth. But they also need to provide funding so that First Nations can heal. So many First Nations are on a path of healing, but they're all in different stages. Different stages of healing. Some are still abusing alcohol and drugs, but they're finding that path. And to find that path, it's hard. It's difficult. It's not something that not every First Nations person can do without support. And they need that support from their families, need support from their chief and councils, from their hereditary chiefs, the matriarchs, but most of all they need support from their own families. Their own families have to support and help them along the way. We need to do this. And how we go about doing that is we need to create a better family atmosphere for First Nations. Like I said, I never had parents growing up. But later on in life, I wish I did. Later on in life, I spend more time with my mom now than I do ever. My dad has since passed, but I still remember the days we had together, the times that we played and had fun. I try not to look at the difficult times and the difficult moments that we had together, because I believe that family is the key to the healing that has to happen with First Nations people. And it needs to be supported by the federal and provincial governments. And it needs to be supported by our neighbors. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity to hear me. I wish everyone across Canada, I wish you all would understand the history of residential schools and the impact that it had. I wish that my grandparents were here alive today to witness the work that we're doing. I wish my great-grandparents were here to hear the stories of their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. And they will be. We pray to our ancestors on a regular basis, and our ancestors hear us. They guide us and give us strength. They provide us with a path that we have to follow. Some paths are difficult, but they wouldn't put us on that path if they didn't think we could handle it. So I just want to say thank you to my ancestors, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, all of those that perished before me, because I'm the man standing here today because of them. Ilm Koselt and all my relations.
I think the biggest thing that non-Indigenous people can do is to know and understand and teach their children that we're all the same, that we all want the same things for our children, and we all want the best for our families. And to know and understand that a lot of other families, whether they're dark-skinned or they speak a different language or they're from another country or whatever those things are, the differences are, that at the purest part of it, we are all the same. And that we need to teach and promote that kindness not only to our own family and to the ones we love, but also the ones that we don't necessarily understand, so that our kids can grow up in a place of knowing that differences are good and that there is the thing that we are all from here.
How do we continue to improve relationships with non-Indigenous and Indigenous people in this country? You know, it's an acknowledgement as a start, but it's sitting down and having those hard conversations. It's, you know, the leadership at WLFN sitting down with the local municipality here in Williams Lake, with the mayor and city council, with the local CRD, with our MLA, with our MP, and having those hard conversations. I mean, at the political level, that's where it's at. But for every single, you know, Joe Canadian or you know, Sally Canadian out there that's going to be looking at how they can contribute to the conversation, it's by having those hard conversations, those hard dialogues with every single one of those Indigenous people that are in their circle. And you know, a lot of the time it's awkward conversation, but it's an integral part of the process is having those hard conversations so that we can all heal.
Talk to us. You got a question, ask. We'll try and answer it the best we can, and if not, we'll find somebody who can. You know, we're not scary little savages running around with hatchets. We're just like you. We bleed red, we bruise, we get a cold. You know, come sit with us and talk to us. I know some of us are scary, but not all of us, you know. Some of us will sit and talk and listen. Some of us are blunt. Some of us are nice. We're just people, you know. We hurt just like you do, and we have a heart too. So just come sit with us. You know, we're not as scary as everybody thinks we are. And no, we don't live in teepees. We live in a house just like you, and we go to the bathroom just like you. So don't be scared of us. You know, we're here, and we're not going away. So come and get to know us. Next time you might be sitting around the campfire with us and calling up your buddy that's, you know, heard that we still run around with hatchets. You know, come join us. Have a good day. Thank you.
My name is Cicely Billy Boy. I'm South Coteen. I'm from Anaheim. I'd like to share for all the non-Indigenous people to be more mindful and open-hearted and be kind, because we are all like healing and learning how to heal in our different ways through anger and hate, and just we're all human. That's what I say. Just be kind.
I think that the best thing that people can do is to know the history of residential school, the history of Canada, the history of the First Nations in the area, and be able to know and understand and come to a place where we can move forward together, where we can celebrate and grow our children and grandchildren in a way that is healthy and promotes oneness for not only our family, but for all families.
How do we get past all of this? We have to do it together. It's a common knowledge that the people, the settlers of Canada and the United States, they always assumed that they were superior to First Nations people. They were in fact so superior that they erased First Nations history from all of the history books. There's not one piece of evidence that First Nations even survived and thrived on the land we call Canada today. We need to start teaching that history back, and we need to bring, when that history is taught, there's going to be a pride that's going to come back to the First Nations people. And when that pride starts to come back, they're going to have a voice. The 215 children that were found at Kamloops Residential School was an awakening. It was an awakening of something great. It was an awakening of the First Nation spirit, the First Nations pride, and across Canada, the settlers of these lands that came into these territories began to realize that First Nations were telling the truth. First Nations have a history, and we need to start breathing life back into that. Through our education programs, through projects like this, we need to, as First Nations people, participate and educate. We need to educate not just our children, but we also need to educate all of Canada. Learning the history of your own backyard as settlers, know that history and listen to it and respect it. First Nations aren't going to ask you to get up and leave. They just want you to hear their story and understand that this was their traditional territory. This is where their ancestors once thrived. Once you begin to understand that, then you begin to understand a little bit of that history of what it is and what it means to be First Nations.
I think the first thing that non-Aboriginal people have to understand is they don't have the solutions. For way too long, solutions have been forced on us, not discussed with us or how would you do it, but forced on us. So I think understanding and working with Aboriginal people, not trying to say this works for us, so it should work for you. That's not the way it should happen. There have to be programs designed by Aboriginal people, working with non-Aboriginal people if they're choosing to be involved, but that's the only way that it's going to go forward. When the Indian Act came into play, when it first came into play, we weren't involved with making it. They didn't come to us and say, what do you think of the Indian Act? Does this work for you? It was imposed on us. And when the Indian Act came into play, all of a sudden, under the Indian Act, we became Indians, and we were looked at as all the same right across Canada. And even here in BC, the interior and the coastal are so different. And I tell people when I do presentations, when you go to Europe, the Irish don't think of themselves as the same from the French, or the German don't think of them the same as, like the British or whomever. And that's just how Native people are too. Our cultures are so different. And so, and even individually in tribes, in the Seguapan tribe, the north are a little different from the south, you know, so it has to be the Aboriginal people. We are not the same. So it has to be geared towards individually to our communities and even within the communities towards individual peoples.
Survivor. Resilience.
Survivor.
Voice.
Iska.
Love.
Resilience.
Generations.
Connection.
Empower.
Liberty.
Forgiveness.
Empowerment.
Resiliency.
Reclaim.
Culture.
I'm a residential school survivor of 7 years, and like everyone else, I guess we need people to understand our elders and understand our youth because of the traumas that they've had to face, and we need to end silence. And somebody was talking about truth and reconciliation. We can't have reconciliation until Canada has admitted they've done wrong, but I think the churches need to admit that they've done wrong in order for us to move forward. You can't force something that they're not willing to do, but we also need to have that forgiveness from the people if they could only admit that they've done wrong. So,
when we talk about the healing journey of First Nations people, it's always about finding the balance. You know, at WLFN, we continue to try and find the balance. And we want to say, you know, to heal as a community, it's going to be culture, it's going to be language, it's going to be tradition, it's going to be ceremony. But I mean, how do we get there? I mean, that's not the only thing that's going to contribute to our healing journey as First Nations people. There's this massive balance that we have to understand, which would be, you know, like getting out on the land, you know, finding opportunities for our members to provide for their families. So the way we look at it at WLFN, the way we look at it is how we find the balance is, you know, we need to create job opportunities in the traditional territory. We need to create revenue streams in the traditional territory. We need to build homes. We need to make sure that we have clean water and sewer opportunities for, you know, our waste to go that's, you know, not impacting the environment, and making sure that we're doing all of this stuff in an environmentally friendly way. I look at, you know, the culture, the language, the traditions, the ceremony. I mean, a lot of that stuff costs money too. We need to be able to pay our elders to teach our younger generations to do that because they need to provide for their families as well. Finding that balance by, you know, working out on the land and signing these agreements and creating businesses and opportunities and revenue streams so that we can pay for those things is one thing, but also paying for education. The federal government is going to be able to continue to fund every single thing that we do. They don't give us enough funding as it is. So what we do at WLFN is we offset that with these different opportunities that we've identified throughout the traditional territory, whether it be cannabis, whether it's revenue sharing agreements with proponents in the traditional territory like Tesico or Imperial, or whether it's, you know, finding these different agreements with the federal and provincial governments that brings additional dollars in so that we can provide better services to our members. I mean, that's how we're finding the balance in our community. It takes great pride and fills my heart when I see an individual in community, whether it's a youth or a middle-aged or an elder, working and getting a paycheck and being able to provide for their family historically how we would as a warrior going out and hunting on the land. But getting out on the land is a big part of that conversation as well, and that's something that we need to realize as First Nations people. Finding the balance isn't just bringing our culture, traditional languages along, it's also providing these opportunities where our members can provide for their family, but getting those revenue streams into our government so that we can provide better services to our membership, which, you know, will all contribute to that balance and that healing journey as an individual, as an Indigenous person.
In 2013, 2014, Justice Murray Sinclair came to a commemoration project that I hosted here in Williams Lake. One of the biggest quotes that I took from his speech to the people that showed up is, it took Canada 150 years to put First Nations where they are today. And it may take another 150 years for the First Nations to build that confidence, to have trust, and to have their traditional cultural pieces back in their lives. It may take them 150 years to heal from everything that happened at these residential schools. And I'm a firm believer that we're on the right path, that projects like this, projects with the education in school districts need to happen, and they need to educate that next generation coming up, because it's the next generation that's going to change. The next generation is going to make change, and there's going to be more respect and a lot more trust from the First Nations communities when it comes to working with our neighbors, with those settlers that came into our territories. For the 215 and for reconciliation. I'm a firm believer that reconciliation is for the living. For the 215 found in Kamloops and across Canada in all other residential schools, the 700 plus, I want restitution. I want restitution for those souls that never had an opportunity to grow up, never had an opportunity to be a parent, to be a mother, to be a father, to be a grandmother, to be a grandfather. I want restitution for them and the loss of those families, the loss that was felt by their parents and their grandparents when their child never returned home. It's an awakening for Canada to start moving forward. The first day, very first day, September 30th in 2021, is going to be the very first day of reconciliation. We're turning the page on history and we're moving forward. But as First Nations people, we need the support of all governments, regional districts. We need support of municipal governments. We need support of the provincial governments and the federal governments to start to develop a better future for our children, a better future for my grandchildren, a better future for all of Canada. And we have to do it together. How do we go about doing something like that? It starts by first listening to the stories of those residential school survivors. It starts by actually doing the research that you have to do, to find the history, to read books, to learn about what actually happened and the process behind the genocide and the treason that Canada had begun in the late 1800s.
So what does the phrase, "every child matters," actually mean to you? It is good to walk in solidarity. It is good to be outraged about all these unmarked graves. It is good to give verbal support, but is that enough? We mourn children of the past. We want to do better for the children now, but what about the children of the future? In Canadian law, a child obtains rights only if it is born alive. In Indigenous laws, 7 generations ahead have rights. And what does every child need to have a good life? We have to look at the whole picture. Do they need love, safety, education, a self-sustaining, healthy, natural economy? Indigenous people, and more recently, the scientists of the world, have been warning about how humans are damaging Mother Earth. While I was reading the 2021 Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it felt like I was reading the forecast of the Armageddon. I am terrified for the future of my grandchildren, only 2 to 3 generations ahead, never mind 7 generations ahead. One scientist even predicts that if things do not change, human life has a 20% chance of disappearing by the year 2100. That's only 80 years from now. And even if there are still humans, I dread to think of what their life might be like. In New Zealand, the Maori tribe fought for 140 years to have one of their rivers granted the same rights as a human being, and Bangladesh followed. Ecuador recognizes nature in their laws, but in Canada, destructive capitalism reigns supreme. People always say that there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in the Indigenous world, and that is true. But there needs to be healing in the non-Indigenous world as well. If Canada wants to reconcile with Indigenous peoples, the first thing they must do is reconcile with Mother Earth. Indigenous peoples have an important role to play in this. In fact, a recent report states that peaceful Indigenous resistance has stopped 1.6 billion tons of greenhouse gases from getting into the environment. And so my message today is, if you really believe that every child matters, educate yourself on how you can lessen your footprint on this earth, and also raise your voice to fight for change. Before the pandemic, children of the world were marching in the streets, fighting for their future. We need to help them now. Thank you.
Dahuja, Sabuzi Corey Peeman, Elgato Danista. Hello, my name is Corey Peeman. I'm from the Elgato First Nations. I just want to share what Orange Shirt Day means to me. To honor all the ones that attended residential school, to honor the ones that never made it home, to honor all those generations that were affected by residential school. I want to share a story about one of our own Elgato Den members. About 25 years ago, Ronald Cahoose, this young man, got tired of all the drug and alcohol abuse happening in our community. To bring awareness to this, he decided to bike across Canada. Because this trip happened a long time ago and social media was not here yet, his trip was not acknowledged. His ride took him 1 month and 22 days. I want to acknowledge what you did, Ronald Cahoose, was a really, really good thing. Even way back then, the effects we were feeling and are dealing with was because of residential school. I take my hat off to you for starting your ride in the middle of nowhere in one of our homestead lands in Blackwater, traveling the back roads to Prince George, BC, for building your bike with what you can, and for dipping your head in the waters of Newfoundland. Somewhere in Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, a street was named after Ronald Cahoose. So that, to me, is what Orange Shirt Day is all about, to honor all the ones that are affected by residential school. Awizi, Chanalia.
What can people do to commemorate Orange Shirt Day? Start doing some research. You know, the city of Williams Lake, a big chunk of them, a big percentage of them didn't know that St. Joseph's Mission was located just 8 kilometers from their city. You know, residential schools aren't something that's happening in the lower mainland or in Alberta or all the way over in Ontario and Quebec. Residential schools are happening right in your backyard, potentially right in your traditional territory. So open a book, fire up the internet and start educating yourself on the history of your region.
To commemorate Orange Shirt Day, I think one of the biggest things that you have to do is acknowledge the fact that there are still survivors out there, that the First Nations history, language, and culture needs to be stood up once again.
On Orange Shirt Day, I'm going to sing. I'm going to be loud and proud. I know that I'm singing for my grandfather who was really impacted by not only residential school, but the impacts of colonialism. I'm going to sing for my auntie who met an untimely death, and that I honor her and her legacy by singing. I'm going to honor my mom and my dad by being as happy as I can be, by feeling all the feelings that come up and healing all of those things and letting them go. because they've done so much and experienced so much so that I could be here today. Most of all, I want to do that for my son and my grandson. He is very connected to his spirit right now. We are teaching him who he is as a Dikesh and a Tzilkotin and the Shekhuapim young man, that he will know and grow into the man that he was born to be, that he will know his history, his songs, his culture, and his land, and go out into the world and promote who he is by sharing the things that we teach him as he grows.
Back when I was in school, there was no education around residential schools. Yeah, and I think it's great that now the kids are being taught about our history, our local history especially in school, and that there's more awareness now for the residential schools and what people went through back then.
I had a really good social studies teacher when I was younger, and he was very open about those type of discussions, and it particularly wasn't more on the lines of truth and reconciliation. It was more about the unfair disadvantages and the things that were taken away, I think, with force in some cases. And to me, I remember feeling a sense of embarrassment and a sense of frustration about why these things happen. And it's, to me now, with the kids today, it's so nice that we now have the opportunity to be very open about it as a society and talk about it, because truthfully, there wasn't a lot of knowledge when I was a lot of discussion around it when I was growing up. It's just something that I think that's just coming into light now.
As someone who hasn't had that experience, it's really important that I try to find out as much and to understand, so that I also can, in my own community, with my friends and my family, that I can also be someone who recognizes when people misspeak, when people say things that they don't even think of as, or they don't have any understanding of of colonialism and the effects of colonialism and how they still exist today. And it's not just about getting over it. It's about really understanding the deep wounds that were caused by that.
My name is George Fraser. I'm the First Nations worker here at Lake City Secondary Colmeets campus.
And can you tell me, what did you learn about truth and reconciliation when you were growing up?
Actually, when I was growing up, we didn't have the opportunity to learn anything about truth and reconciliation, or really a lot about anything about Canadian history. We were pretty fortunate. I went to school here in town and went through Glendale my whole elementary school years, went to Ann Stevenson and then Colmeets for graduation. We didn't have any of those topics to actually talk about. It was pretty cut and dried all-American history.
Reconciliation to me is accepting what was going on, and we have to finding a way to make a difference about it and finding a way to change what happened.
It basically, to me, it sort of means just learn from our past and just sort of try and do better in the future and just see what we can do to make things better for people.
Just spreading awareness about what they've gone through and how it affects them in a daily life, and see if they are still affected by it.
And yeah, I agree to that. I think they need more awareness of how important what they've done for us is, and just, yeah, they need more awareness.
Reconciliation means the opportunity to build awareness and education with the general public and how we've been affected by residential school. I believe that once that's been recognized and supported, we can move forward in our healing journey, not just as a nation, individual or family, but as the general public.
it's been 150 plus years that this has been going on, and we've only had 24 years to actually to start recovering from it. So it's still at an early stage where we need to just take our time, and there's got to be a lot of compassion for the survivors and for all those that didn't make it home. Let's start from there.
So the first question is, what do you feel that you can do to help residential school survivors and all those affected heal? Well, I think the first thing that I can do is to unlearn some of the, or a lot of the colonial information that I learned as a kid growing up, and to educate myself on the rights of Indigenous people as well as the actual history of what happened in Canada due to residential schools. What did I learn about residential schools in school? Well, I didn't learn anything, and it's kind of interesting because I went to school in School District 27. I graduated in 1996. I went to multiple different schools, and I never learned anything about residential schools. I have a half-sister who I spent much time as a young kid out at Deep Creek Reserve with her family, and her grandmother attended St. Joseph's for 11 years, which I didn't even know until this year. So I didn't learn anything in school. I've lived here my whole entire life. St. Joseph's is here. I've got to ask myself, why weren't we taught what was happening in the residential schools in our own community? I definitely witnessed the racism and hatred towards First Nations peoples growing up as a kid in school. I still witness some of it today. The next question is, what does reconciliation mean to me? Well, I think reconciliation means to me when we have integrated First Nations cultures into all that we do, when the Declarations and Rights of Independent Peoples, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when those calls to action are actually actioned. It looks like to me when we no longer have First Nations education in schools being taught, but it's actually just education, and everybody's getting the same education and the same history and the truth, the true Canadian history. And it's the last question is, what are the next steps that you're going to take towards that journey? Well, I think is to continue to learn more about the calls to action, to learn more about the history of Canada as it went down, to learn more about residential schools and the truth, and to also help my family members unlearn and to help educate my children. Recently, we took part in the Spirit Walk, the last leg of the journey from mile 2 into the Arbor Grounds at Eskedum, and both of my children's, both my girls attended with me at 11 and 7 years old, and my 11-year-old, after one of the stories from one of the elders in regards to the priests at St. Joseph's or these residential schools, how the older girls would disappear for 9 months and then they would come back and there would be, children to bury. And my daughter just couldn't fathom how anybody could ever do something like that to people. And I think it's important that we talk about what actually went on, and we talk to our kids and we talk to our family members. And we be allies, and we participate in ceremony, and we go to community, and we listen and we unlearn maybe what we learned when we were growing up. I also feel like the steps that I want to take in this journey is to continue to be an advocate at the tables that I sit at as a local politician, to continue to bring voices to the table, to advocate for our First Nations communities, to find ways to partner and to deepen our understandings of each other and our relationship, and to find ways to work together as local governments so that we can serve the needs of all the humans who live in our communities. So yeah, thank you.
this guilt, I have this shame. I have a conscience, so I have to take the blame. I stood back, I watched it all. I even helped imprison you behind those walls. No excuse is good enough. I never let you speak unless you mimicked us. I can't run, I can't hide. Why I can't even look you in the eye. No hollow prayer, no silent shout, no more empty words spilling from my mouth. You stripped away my thin disguise, and all that I can do is say I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought that God was on my side. With my righteousness I'd tame the savage child. I would not have them running free. If they assimilate, they could be like me. How many can the wagons hold? Another 1,000 children, I suppose. It must have seemed like Judgment Day, the anguish as the wagons rolled away. I can't begin to know your pain. You can't forgive as long as memory remains. Through it all, you still survive. And all that I can do is say I'm sorry. I apologize. No hollow prayer, no silent shout, no more empty words spilling from my mouth. You stripped away my thin disguise, and all that I can do is say I'm sorry. I apologize. No hollow prayer, no silent shout, no more empty words spilling from my mouth. You stripped away my thin disguise, and all that I can do is say I'm sorry. Joking on the words that say I'm sorry. I apologize. I apologize. I apologize.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Brandon Greenberg from Chatham, Kent, originally from Walpole Island. The tribe is Odawa. Clan is Crane and Wolf. I wear this to honor the thousands of children found. It also means that I'm free. I don't feel as if I'm caged away from my culture.
And as we wear our orange shirts or our orange shirt pins,
when I reflect on these pins and what they mean to me, it's hard to put it into words.
we may never know their identities or anything ever, but we know that they're with Creator.
And when we all put these pins on, and the first thing that comes to me obviously is family, and how important it is to have a family and have an identity that's rooted in your cultural history and past, but also what's important and valuable to you. So when I wear this pin, I can't help but think of the amount of families that lost pieces of themselves, and I can't imagine losing my kids.
Aware of these children in residential school and what happened, because it's everyone's history. It's not just ours, it's ours and yours together, so it's ours. It's not just one or the other.
I will always support and back my First Nations, Métis, and Inuit neighbors, and I look forward to bringing all of the children home.
Well, our hearts are broken, really. We need to reach out and love, to show people that there is good in everyone.
So I'm cutting this for the orange shirts, for button pins to wear, and I'm happy to see that it's going to go out of our area so that everybody can wear a pin.
From it, I spurred a red feather. Feathers carry a lot of tradition. My birth name actually, that's a soaring flying eagle. So my spirit animal is the eagle.
I want to talk about why I wear this pin, and with the feeling that it evokes is reconnection and healing. In the last couple of years, my immediate family members have started reconnecting with relatives that are still living on Six Nations.
And for me, this pin represents a whole lot of things, but I've had the good fortune over the past year to really work closely with some good friends I'm developing in the Indigenous community. And this pin represents my good fortune of developing a closer connection with them, and I look forward to many, many more years ahead of deepening that friendship, and that we can all walk forward in good faith and positive energy.
It's all about being human, and it's all about wanting the same things in life.
Now we have to become a new generation.
We just have so many gifts to share from all our cultures to put together and make a beautiful world.
These pins really mean a lot to me, and I'm so happy that Lana, came with the idea, and I believe it was her spirit that moved her, because we really do believe. We believe in connecting us together as a community, as Chatham-Kent, and helping to heal and to have understanding and education.
This pin, to me personally, gives me hope for the future, that there will be positive change.
That we're all walking together with an orange shirt towards the same goal.
For a common goal of love, because it always all comes down to love.
For me, it's progress, it's power, it's
coming together as one.
Other cultures are talking about it, brings awareness. It's nice to know that.
To put our best foot forward to solve some of the issues of the past and make our world a better place.
And that we need to just send our love out to everyone.
Make this world a better place, starting right in our own little community.
Every kid matters.
And healing together.
That's what it means to me. Thank you all.
Bonjour, hello. I'm Kevin Lamoureux. I'm so proud to be able to recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada. I believe that reconciliation is a gift that was given to us by survivors. Residential school survivors who had the courage to share their stories with us and provide us with an opportunity to move forward in a good way through the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Today, I take inspiration from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, an organization whose responsibility it is now to care for those stories, to hold those stories intact for generations to come. Within that organization's logo, we might find teachings and inspiration that help us to navigate the work of reconciliation. Within their logo, you'll find the depiction of a fire. And that fire is supposed to represent the spirit of reconciliation. I would invite you to think about moments you might have had in your own life sitting around a fire, perhaps with your family or friends. And as we recall those moments of warmth, belonging, safety, and light, it's that spirit that is reconciliation for all Canadians. And within that flame, what you'll see is the depiction of two birds. And those birds are supposed to represent us, you and I, Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. For there is no future in Canada without our good relationship with one another. The potential of Canada is bound up in its people. You'll also notice that that fire is made up of a smaller bit of flame. And that smaller bit is supposed to represent the spirit of children. And not just our children, but those children yet to come. And not just those children not yet born, but perhaps those children who didn't make it home. This has been a year of terrible grief for many Canadians. Many communities are having to wrestle with the hard truth of finding their children buried in unmarked graves behind the buildings of residential schools. On this day, we recognize that terrible history. We acknowledge and stand with those who are grieving. We take a moment to remember those children who weren't able to find the love and the safety within Canadian schools that they should have. You'll also notice that around that flame is a circle. And there are so many teachings from the circle from Indigenous communities across Canada. But it's our business to ensure that that circle is always big enough so that every Canadian who would like to can find their way to that fire, find a place of belonging, a place of safety. For in reconciliation, we'll find the best possible future for all Canadians. Today, I stand with incredible gratitude. I stand in awe of survivors who had the courage to share their story and provide us with a pathway forward. I stand in gratitude for those who do this important work day in and day out across this country. And I also stand with hope. Hope that our children will be able to see a Canada that is able to live up to its full potential. That through days of recognition like this, we have an opportunity to come together as a community and work together to help this nation to achieve its full potential. Thank you for standing with Indigenous peoples on this day. Thank you for believing in the potential, the hope of reconciliation. And thank you for the good work that you will continue to do in your own lives. Miigwech.
Like heute so hope the difference was tatsächlich sofort im Urlaub.
Hello everyone, I'm Sunrise when the salmon come. My borrowed name is Cheryl Chapman and I'm from the Hatsup First Nation. It's good to see you. I thank you for joining us today as we take just a few minutes out of our day to remember and to reflect as the history is uncovered, the true history of Canada and the United States of Turtle Island. I've seen my friends here in this circle with shock and sadness in their eyes. I can feel the pain in their hearts and the fear of not knowing what to say to me. That speaks volumes. It lets me know that you care. And you being here today with us lets me know that once again. I brought my family picture down with me today. Great Granny Lucy was at the residential school in Lytton. My grandfather and my grandmother both went to the St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School. And all of their children went, including my mom. My mom, Jeanette, went to the St. Joseph's Mission for 9 years, and then she was transferred to Kamloops. And ever since I was old enough to understand that I was Secwepemc and that I was Indian, I was proud to be an Indian. Along with that came a lot of responsibility to hang on to the stories and the history and the knowledge that my grandfather and grandmother shared with me and my mom. The sad part for me is that some of that history and some of that knowledge includes the Indian residential schools and the impact that they had not only on my family but families all the way across, up and down Turtle Island. The sadness, the pain, the anger, the hurt. The challenge was that we weren't allowed to feel it. We weren't allowed to talk about it. We weren't allowed to announce that those things happened. It was just a part of life for us. When I was young, my mom started talking to me about the residential schools. She told me about the grave sites. She told me about the children, the babies that were put into the incinerators in the basement of St. Joseph's Mission. The babies that were fathered by priests. The ones that were put into the cavities in the walls in the tunnel in St. Joseph's Mission. I was horrified. I was sad. I was thinking, how old would those children be? They'd be a little bit older than I am. They didn't even get a chance. And I lived with that knowledge my whole life. I hate to tell you this, but I'm 58 years old. In my 57th year, somebody said, oh, by the way, we found 215 unmarked graves at Kamloops. I knew my mom and her sister had gone to Kamloops. And I knew that my partner's brothers and sisters had gone to Kamloops Indian Residential School. And I was just horrified, and then I was not shocked because Mom had talked about it. But then it hit me that had any of my mom's siblings not made it home. So I questioned my mom, and I thank our good Creator and perseverance and strength all of my mom's siblings made it home. And all of my cousins made it home. You see, my generation is the last generation to go to the Indian Residential School, St. Joseph's Mission. I was not one of them. By design of the government, they had decided that I wasn't Indian. They were trying to annihilate us, root us out of existence. But I carry the stories, I carry the knowledge, I carry the history, I carry the intergenerational trauma. And because of that, I also carry the strength, the perseverance, and the voice to be able to say it out loud. Because I've always been a little sassy that way. I'm going to tell the truth. And I think that's why Creator has put us here in Barkerville. And I thank each and every one of you in this circle for hearing my truth, respecting that truth, and being a strength for me every day. Because I know if I have a hard time, I just have to look around. And I have strength here to help me, to hold me up. Because the truth sometimes is really painful. And as we work through the work that we do here with heritage and education, we get to see, feel, and be true reconciliation right here on the ground. Everybody that we talk to, every tourist, each other, when we bring awareness to each other of the history, when we fill in the blank pages of the history books and we write new ones. And as we do that, we get to see a better future. And that's why I'm here. That's why we do what we do. And I thank Barkerville Historic Town and Park on the day that they released the 215 numbers for Kamloops Indian Residential School. They lowered their flags to half-mast. It made me cry. I was so touched by the fact that somebody thought about that. I was kind of in a daze. I was kind of wandering around wondering, holy man, like how many more are they going to find? And then I looked up and our flags were at half-mast. Held my hands out and I said, thank you. And things like that happen here every day. Every day somebody does something that just makes me smile. And it encourages me to continue with the work that we do here. And the smile on my face today is because you're all here to share in this few moments of time, just a few minutes out of your day to stop and recognize that this will be the first National Truth and Reconciliation federal holiday. And I hear from the Premier that he's going to do this for British Columbia as well. So I just want to thank you for recognizing this day and being with us. And I hold my hands up to every one of you. I know that I cherish every one of you. You make me happy, and that makes my work a lot easier. Really makes my work a lot easier. When you're happy in what you're doing, it's the right thing to do, right?
Right behind him. And Chechua Sinja Vitasket, Red Camel Gas, the Staktaus, the Sequat Mapulip, the Equin. As Equa Mumtkenta, Metam, as Equa Elkstwinta, Barkerville Town and Park. I want to start by acknowledging Barkerville Town and Park for their leading edge work in the province, in their work toward our reconciliation, in their work toward implementing the United Nations Human Rights Declaration recommendations. And I am right where I need to be. We are the evidence of those past wrongs. We are the evidence of those nutritional experimentations. We are the evidence of the abuses that have occurred in those residential schools. And we're the evidence that we are still here. And we all have a lot of work to do, and Barkerville have been taking those steps in every way possible. Trying to think of even ways how to do our work better. How we can educate the public, educate our guests that come from all across Canada and beyond. So we have been invited to submit a piece to the National Truth and Reconciliation part for September 30th. And the best way that we can do that are to share the national, the Shuswap honor song. And we passed some drums out to our friends as well, so there's more than just 2 drums here. And we're going to share the Shuswap honor song. Cook stat cook, the cat cook be, the scat that cook, that the milk cook. Yok minder for why the stem the alien to milk. Yok minder cow mastiff. It's peculiar. It's sur. It's surqua. At Ethan's cook. Kunuk what the cook is your yacht's cook. Cook stat cook, the cat cook be, the scat that cook, why the stem.